So, terrorists win, or counter-terrorist win, has to be one of the most iconic lines in all of Counter-Strike. But what if this beloved naming convention was doing more harm than good? What if calling each side terrorist or counter-terrorist was holding us back from bigger things? It's an old question. Should we change terrorist and counter-terrorist to attack and defense, or red and blue, or criminals and police, or whatever? It's also a question that people get pretty heated about.
I need help here!
Okay. Now before you start blasting me on Twitter or writing your 500-word comment below, just hear me out. Let's have a rational discussion about this issue for 10 minutes, please. Let's start with the apparent problem here. Look, we all love CSGO, and most of us have no issue with calling them terrorists or counter-terrorists. But some people, or more accurately, some giant corporations with very powerful PR departments do. These giant corporations have giant bank accounts to match, and they could help take the esport we love to the next level. Understand that it's not necessarily about anyone being offended here, or about being politically correct, or about correlating video game violence with real-life violence, which I think we all understand is bullshit. It's about this. Can we alleviate a sponsorship problem, a money problem in CSGO by making this change? And if you think there isn't a problem with the words terrorist and counter-terrorist when it comes to how corporations with deep pockets look at our esport, well, you're wrong. Look, SK Gaming, one of the oldest esports organizations on the planet, pulled out of CSGO entirely in 2018, all due to the fact that some big-name sponsorships with deep pockets didn't want anything to do with the game.
We wanted to try something new for the brands. It's also connected to the new brands that we're working with, especially with the sponsors. Counter-Strike is a more problematic title than some people think, especially when it comes down to the sponsorship market in Central Europe, in Germany. A lot of companies actually have a problem with the game. It's a 16+ title, and we have no problem in working with and around it. But for some partners, it is a sacrifice, and they might not want to do it.
Now, maybe some of you from the US and Canada are sitting here after that clip and saying, wow, Germany sucks. What is their problem? Well, it's not just the land of Volkswagen and Schnitzel. The IGL for Vitality, Alex, told me that in France as well, there is a serious problem selling CS.
Something will happen in the world. Like, for example, in France, where we have lots of problems with Counter-Strike because it's terrorists against anti-terrorists, and with the bombings that happened in France, sponsors don't want to go anywhere near CS. So if this was to happen on a more global scale, CS is still terrorists against anti-terrorists. I could see a world where no one would want to go near it because of that, and they would have to do a sequel where they would change it to, like, I don't know, police against robbers or whatever you want to call it. Everyone's interested by the stats that CS brings, like the actual the competition side of everything, but as soon as they hear terrorists against anti-terrorists, that's it. Not going anywhere near it.
One of the main counter-arguments that I keep seeing when it comes to getting rid of terrorists and counter-terrorists is the changing of the DNA of CS. The idea that we're mutilating this thing that we love, this thing that has 20 years of history, all in the name of a few extra dollars. That today it's getting rid of terrorists and counter-terrorists, and tomorrow we're planting birthday presents and shooting paintball guns. It's actually something Anders Bloom and I talked about a little bit in Berlin for the major.
I think it does make a difference if you start to interfere with, like, the theme of it. Like, yes, we are planting a bomb in a bomb site, you know? It's like, fine, like, I could see how it would be, you would feel the sort of attempt to steer the game in a different direction if suddenly it was something else where it was like, you know, I have to bring a briefcase in and it has to stay there for a while, and then then people would be like, what are we doing here? You know, even though the actual feature of it could be exactly the same thing, you know, it would still feel odd, you know.
And you know what? This does make a certain amount of sense. I mean, realistically, does this problem with selling CS to mainstream sponsors just boil down to the word terrorist? Isn't the blood, the violence, the shooting, the guns, everything that makes CSGO CSGO the real problem here? Well, maybe. But consider Rainbow Six Siege. It's a game with a very heavy terrorist versus counter-terrorist vibe. Operators have realistic guns, they kill each other, there's a bomb involved, and a lot of blood.
You're mine, podcast.
The only difference really between the two is in R6 there's less overt references to terrorists versus counter-terrorists. That, and I guess technically the gameplay is like a counter-terrorist simulation. And at least when it comes to France, Alex told me that Rainbow Six doesn't suffer from the same public perception problem that CS does.
Rainbow Six's problem is probably more the game itself and not being as popular as CS right now. For them not getting sponsors, maybe, but yeah, no, it's definitely, I think in France it's only CS that has this problem.
Now, there are other potential solutions here too if we really want to keep terrorists versus counter-terrorists. Let's look at mixed martial arts. Like CSGO, it has to some degree a sponsorship problem due to the violent nature of the sport. But if you operate under a pay-per-view model like say UFC, you don't have to appease those sponsors who might be uncomfortable with the violent nature of your esport or your sport. And Anders made that exact same comparison.
I love the analogy that I also try and bring up all the time to UFC. I watch a lot of UFC, I think it's great. They've solved a huge amount of problems there by putting everything behind a pay-per-view wall. And you can understand why. They have the same problem. How do they find sponsorships for the UFC? You have an octagon in which people are, quite literally bleeding on the company logos that are sponsoring them. You're only going to find like a handful of sponsors that are in on that. And maybe the sponsors that are in on it even know that they're not in sharp competition with, every company in the world, unlike soccer or, football or whatever it is. So maybe you can't pressure them nearly as much. You won't get like the same amount of advertising dollars out of it, even though the UFC is doing quite well as far as I know. But and you can afford to have a lower viewership overall because every viewer is going to be paying more or less through the pay-per-view thing. And obviously that's been tried in esports and failed a number of times, but maybe that is one solution, and maybe especially for a game like Counter-Strike, which again is sort of advertiser sensitive for reasons that I can't even really explain, but
If we don't change terrorist and counter-terrorist, is CSGO esports going to die? No, obviously not. Our growth will just be that much more limited, and we don't want to lose our identity just because of growth. But honestly, guys, if you woke up tomorrow and it was attack versus defense, would it really matter?
Yeah, attackers and defenders, fine. Like, if that is what it takes to bring, Coca-Cola or Nike or whatever to say, fine, as long as they don't say the word terrorist, then we're good to go. I think that's such a small sacrifice that I can't see why that would even offend anybody or like anyone would really be angry about it.
Want to do some impressions, if that's okay? I like to do some impressions. Just because I play a lot of Inferno, so I know what the CTs sound like on Inferno a lot. Let's just say, this is bandit country. Shoot everything that moves. Middle. Bingo, bongo, bongo. Good stuff, mate. Middle. Oh, you're right on, you're right on. Gimli? Yeah? Middle.